had to take a minute to get our illustrations in order there. All right, tonight in our series yesterday and today and forever, the mystery of the great book of Hebrews, we're toward the end of chapter 11. And we're at the part of this that I just have in my mind or in my notes this way: just by faith, which is of course the often repeated statement of this chapter. What is it? 18 times we found out in this chapter. But here at the end of Hebrews 11, there is the summary. And this is not quite as topical as what we have been doing in our classes on Wednesday night, but I wanted to do it this way because I think we illustrate something about maybe the way to handle or one way to think about this whole chapter. So this is Hebrews 11 and verse 29 through 38, I think it is. Yes, 38. So kind of what I'm getting at here and something that helps me, it's really, I mean, you could benefit, many of us have, and be real easy just to read Hebrews 11 and just look at the different stories of the characters, of the examples that are strung together, and just to say this is all things that they did by faith, but not to think about what the writer of Hebrews is trying to accomplish in this section. And he tells us, I think, what he's trying to accomplish in the section. And if we can kind of bear this in mind, it helps us to see then the application that he wants us to make from these the experience of these great people of faith whom he lists throughout this whole chapter. What I've been trying to illustrate to the class, the Sunday morning section of this series, Linda, if you'll put up the first one of those slides for us. In my mind, it has helped me to realize that these are the key terms of that this entire discussion of Hebrews 11 is built around and keeps returning to. The writer starts with these, and just to maybe refresh our minds a minute, or to mention this if you haven't been with us in the Sunday part, which many of you, of course, in other classes, but just to illustrate this, if you look at chapter 10 and verse 36, the transition to this discussion of what is done by faith really starts here. The writer has already stressed that we all need to draw near with a true heart and full assurance of faith. 10:22. Then he illustrates his concern for these people is that they've been through a lot of things. Now then they're tired and they seem to be thinking of giving up, throwing away their confidence, verse 35 said. So the great term that is mentioned here is translated, in some cases, some versions, patience, or some versions, steadfastness, and this one, ESV, endurance. And it is this is the need that he then wants us to see. What he's going to want us to see is that all of these examples, these characters who did things by faith, were people who, whatever else was happening, endured in their lives. They didn't draw back. Then the term pleasing, it's pleasure at the end of verse 38. It's who God takes pleasure in, or who God is pleased with. This is chapter 10, verse 38, and chapter 11, verse 6. Without faith, it's impossible to please him. The writer then concerns himself with things future, that is, things hoped for, chapter 11, verse 1, and things that are invisible, things not seen, chapter 11, verse 1. And then in the case of Moses and of others in this chapter, remember Moses Look down to verse 27. Moses endured as seeing him who is invisible. That is kind of the essential example of what he has in mind. So the first half of the chapter, especially with Abraham and Sarah, involved their obeying God concerning things future. The last half of the chapter with Moses on involves their enduring with God where things are invisible. And the two reasons are, on people's part, the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen. And then the other term that's really important through the chapter is who God commended, who God witness that he accepted or that he was pleased with, that he would reward. And this starts in chapter 11 in verse 2, but then the term is repeated several times in verses 4 and following. So this whole chapter is not random. The examples are chosen pretty much in order down to the passage that we're going to read tonight, but all of them weave together in an intricate way these concepts here to say these are the things that are at work where faith moves people along. He's interested in what people do, but also in why they do it, and importantly, in how long they'll do it, or will do it. And so tonight we are at the part of this where this describes the experience of great people of faith from the time of the Exodus on past the end of the Old Testament. All the characters and stories he refers to now are in that period of time. I want to ask you what you think of these as we go along. But I wish I could just keep showing you those terms, but instead of writing them up here tonight, I want to take a little bit different way of listing them. So first off, we'll just look at the experiences by faith that he mentions here. And this is leaving slavery, or leaving bondage, and entering the land of promise. That's where we start with here. And this is verses 29 through 31. And this writer just contents himself here with the time after the Exodus, with two things on the part of the people, and then one case of someone in the land here. So he says, verse 29, by faith the people crossed the Red Sea as on dry land, but the Egyptians, when they attempted to do the same, were drowned. What is it that you think he wants to highlight here about faith? Linda, can you put my list back up? Is it possible to do that, John? Okay. Which one of the qualities, or which ones of the qualities here are at work when a people crosses the Red Sea on dry land, but another people trying to do the same thing simply gets destroyed? What's the difference here? Which of those qualities that you think the writer wants us to see was at work among the Israelites, but not among the Egyptians? All right, the intention to be pleasing to God, or God's commending. God kind of showed there, didn't he, who he was pleased with and who he wasn't? I mean, if in one case you walk through on dry ground, in another case the sea closes in on you. And then why did they do it? If you think about it, the Israelites saw the invisible God, didn't they? They walked. Remember, Moses had said, "Stand still." Remember what he said? "Stand still and see." The salvation of the Lord. They were seeing the invisible. It looks like you've been brought to a dead end here. They saw the salvation of the Lord, and the Israelites saw slaves that they wanted to get back. Two different things. Would it have taken any endurance for the Israelites to march through the sea on dry ground? They didn't. Maybe they had trouble with that eventually, but here, maybe it looks like there was a little bit of we had no choice at this point, but they also went with the Lord through the sea, didn't they? The second thing he mentions about them, by faith, the walls of Jericho fell down after they had been encircled for 7 days. All right, what quality, what aspect of faith is the writer wanting the people wanting to emphasize here? I found this section here described this way: by faith, strongholds tumble down. Whether it's the sea and the no way through there, or the Egyptian power and the Egyptian army, or whether it was Jericho. And what aspect of faith here? What made the walls fall down? The invisible God made them fall down. So it's not the Israelites marching around the wall. It's the fact that they did it by faith. Remember, God told them carefully what to do. How many times you march around it the first day? Remember, and he arranged the priests and the ark and then the people, and there's no sound and so forth all the way around it. The second day, third day. Is there any problem with endurance here or patience? Would there have been with you? About the fourth day, what would you have started saying? I don't see what good this is going to do. Or how about this? We tried this yesterday. You know, that type. Fifth day. Sixth day. Next day. 7 times. Why? Because that's what God said to do. And then what happened? The walls fell in. Who knocked them down? God did. So that's the idea, I think. The assurance about the future, the walls would fall, the conviction of things not seen, God would do it, cause the people patiently to do what God gave them to do. Then the next story is Rahab. Rahab the harlot. Rahab was a Gentile. The fact that she's described as a harlot also is descriptive of her experience in the pagan world, the immorality that would have been involved in that. But she did not perish with those who were disobedient, meaning the other citizens of Jericho who sought for the representatives of Israel that they would then destroy. Rahab hid them because she had heard about God, and she gave them a friendly welcome. I answered my own question I was going to ask you there. Why'd she hear them? Why'd she hide them? Well, she heard about God. So, by faith, I'll say it this way, the most disreputable is redeemed by this misreputable, right? I left it out here. The most disreputable. You guys are no help here. All right, is redeemed. I'm just writing it to try to illustrate that maybe the way this would look if you try to put it in words here. These two case studies round off what he has been saying through the whole list of characters that are named, 18 or so different ones, 16 different ones maybe it is. to show they're doing what Abraham or what Noah or Abraham or Sarah or Moses or the others have done. They're acting on what God told them to do about things that no one had experienced or seen before, and they're doing it all the way through, all the way to the end of their experience, to the end of their situation that he's describing here. What strikes you about those two illustrations that might be helpful to us? What practical lesson would you take from either one of those two stories? Or maybe both of them?
Seems like that ought to work out.
All right. In both cases, it doesn't seem like by any human standard this should work out this way. The Red Sea or the walls of Jericho or Rahab's life, this isn't how we would do it. So it has to be things that are hoped for and unseen. And you have to take the invisible God at His word and follow through with what He says to the end. That's how faith is. You don't get the impression here that faith is just, okay, I believe that. This would have been a challenge to follow the Lord through all of this, wouldn't it? And it would have involved some faithfulness or some loyalty to God in that way. All right, anyone else? At this point now, the writer uses the favorite words of many a preacher probably. And what more shall I say? Or this, for time would fail me. And that's the truth. All right, so that's what happens. Now, at this point, what happens in order to kind of summarize this or round this off, he moves from by faith, which he has been using here, to through faith. I'm not sure that, I don't know if there's any particular point made by that, but here he mentions the triumphs and for the first time here, he will get out of maybe chronological order a little bit. The triumphs of judges, kings, and prophets. And he summarizes the experiences of many, but this particular little section especially focuses on the victories, the triumphs, the exploits. And notice the characters, and you can call to your minds the wonderful stories of each of these. And what more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah. What do all four of those men have in common other than through faith? They're all judges, that's right. And they all won victories, and in each case, they were mighty or unthinkable victories. It strikes me that one or two of these seem to be like Jephthah. I'm not sure I would have thought of him as an outstanding example of this, but he was the fellow who kept his vow, if you remember. And then David is the king that the Messiah ends up coming as a descendant of. He's the king who Israel, whom God made promises to, that he would establish his kingdom and his throne. But the point being made here is it's David's faith which is at work in all of his victories and his triumphs and his exploits in life. And then out of order, he returns to Samuel, who's actually the one who anointed David, you remember, and then the prophets who came after that period of time and who spoke to the kings about what God's judgments or God's will was. And then look at all the different things that these great characters did through faith. All right, now the writer is moving toward his point here in a very, very skillful way. So kind of watch as he moves along. Here are people who do what we think fits faith. They win victories. Through faith, they conquered kingdoms. That would be some of the judges, of course, and David. They enforced justice. Again, David and some of the prophets who obtained promises, who stopped the mouths of lions, who quenched. Now we think of the lions. David once had killed lions, he said, and then of course prophets, the things that happened in the time of Daniel and in that time, who quenched the power of fire. We think of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who were made strong out of weakness. That sure would take into account Gideon and Barak. How was Barak made strong out of weakness? That's right. Barak was so strong that he wouldn't go into battle unless Deborah went with him. And so that's what happened, if you remember. And then they escaped the edge of the. Let me back up. Obtained promise, stopped the mouths, quenched the power of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war. Now, that'd be David especially, and who put foreign armies to flight. Now, all of those, those are the inspiring stories of faith. When it looks like things work like they're supposed to, that's what you'd expect. You follow God, and God gives you great victories. We're more than conquerors. You know, that kind of thing. Justice is brought to victory. The good guys win, the bad guys lose, and that's the way faith works. And a lot of times, if you notice even the way some who look for a religious following try to present the faith to people, if you just please God, then He will, your life will be, you probably be wealthy, you'll have fame, and you'll have possessions. There is, in other words, what's called the gospel of success, the gospel of prosperity. You know, that idea. And then you go along and there'll be some great faithful persons who have served the Lord, and it'll look like the whole world has caved in on them. And then you think, wait a minute. Has God failed them? Is He unhappy with them? It's not supposed to work this way. This is not the way we thought things would be. So the writer is showing here that the God that these people serve gave them great victories, a lot of stories like that, and a lot of times it worked out that way. I want you to notice especially one important statement in verse 33. Middle of the verse, or toward the end. Who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises. Hasn't that been the big issue in Hebrews 11, or a big issue in Hebrews 11? The point that was made with Abraham and Sarah and the others is they lived their whole lives and they didn't obtain, they didn't receive what was promised. They looked forward to it all. They counted him faithful who had promised. But they all died in faith, not having received the things promised. Verse 13. The writer here is saying in some cases, in many cases, people did. Faith is enduring, seeing Him who's invisible, that we may obtain the promises. And sometimes that happens in this world, and sometimes it doesn't. And that's where endurance becomes the large passage. I brought with me a little bit of a quote about this section, verses 32 and following in this book here. And we've just read 32 through 34. The first part of 35 said women receive back their dead from resurrection or by resurrection. Remember the widow that Elijah dealt with, for example, in that way here. The writer says, and I'll show you some of these phrases later. So for now, just let me read it to you. This is one of the most beautiful passages from the standpoint of style to be found in Hebrews. It's also the most moving. It serves magnificently to summarize the writer's concept of faith. It is what drives one forward always, never allowing the luxury of retreat. It is venturesome action, he calls it. It is trust and confidence. The it here is always faith now. It is obedience. It is endurance. Faith is seeing the invisible in clear focus so that the present visible world loses its charm. One is thereby enabled to forfeit life itself if necessary in order to gain that better world to come, which is what the last part of verse 35 is going to start with. So let's finish the story and go back and think about it a little bit here. What he says next. By the way, what's your favorite one of those stories of triumph from that list that we just read in 32 through the first part of 35? Which is your favorite story of the victory of faith from that you can identify in that list? Becky? All right. Rahab's whole life, and then the influence on subsequent ages also. From verse 32 and following, what other experience mentioned, 33, 34, first part of 35, is your favorite? David and Goliath, all right. I think about Daniel in the lion's den. How many people has something like that encouraged? I think about the victory over oppressors that happened every time the people in the days of the judges finally repented and called out on God, and he sent someone to deliver them. Each case is amazing. The story of David himself as a man after God's own heart, who not only escaped the edge of the sword himself when Saul was trying to kill him, but also put foreign nations to flight in many ways, given the people of Israel. It wasn't just his victory, in other words, it was theirs too. And then I want to point out that the writer goes ahead to say, but now, through faith, some were tortured. This is the last half of verse 35. Now, think about what he says here. First half of verse 35, through faith, women received back their dead by resurrection. Some were tortured. Why does that call for faith?
You have to have faith to endure this instead of just saying,
all right. When your neighbor is receiving back a loved one from the dead and you're being tortured because of the same faith, That's hard to hang on to the same faith, isn't it? And that the one is what you hope for and expect, and the other is the opposite of that. And in this case, notice how he defines the ones who were tortured. First, they refused something. What did they refuse? They refused to accept release. Why would release have been possible in their torture? And why did it take faith to refuse to accept release? What does that imply?
Well, it's like Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, our God is able
Yep.
to save us, but even if he doesn't,
Okay.
we will follow him.
All right. Brennan?
In the first century, all you had to do is say Caesar is God, and they'd believe.
All right. In the first century, if you would say Caesar is Lord, then you could go ahead and worship your God too if you wanted to the rest of the time. So it implies that the torture is being inflicted because of your loyalty to God, and you could escape it by denying him. And these people would not deny him, meaning that they were faithful or loyal. The other half of the story, it says, is they did this so that they might rise again to a better life. Women received back their loved ones from the dead, by resurrection, but some people had to endure so that they might rise to a better life. They're looking to the reward. They're looking for the future thing that's hoped for, and in this way, it sure didn't look like a triumph at the time. Yet it was, because the loyalty to the Lord endured here. They stayed with it. And then he says, also through faith, some suffered. Others suffered. This is verses 36 through 38. And I think here, you see the progression of the thought where he is headed when he's writing to people who maybe have suffered or have stood with those who have suffered, but who's now their hands are hanging down and their knees are weak and they're thinking about giving up. Their suffering is something that happens to them in spite of their faith, maybe, but also sometimes because of it. In verse 36, you notice that sometimes this seems to be on a particular occasion or episodal in its nature. Others suffered mocking and flogging and even chains and imprisonment. So they suffered insult, beating, and bondage. In verse 36. And doesn't mean this is the entire whole experience, but it certainly happened to them. And the invisible God to whom they were loyal let it happen to them for a time being. And that's the challenging aspect of this verse. And then in some cases their suffering was final, not temporary. Verse 37, they were stoned, meaning the expected result of that was what? Death, all right. They were stoned. They were sawn in two. There is the legend or the tradition that this is what happened to the prophet Isaiah for his preaching about the servant of the Lord who would come. They were killed with the sword. In each of those cases, what they suffered is death, and in each case, an awful kind of death. They met an awful end. And then there is the kind of suffering which is continuing. In this case, the people had to go on living. Okay, look at this, middle of verse 37. They went about in skins and skins of sheep and goats, destitute, afflicted, mistreated, of whom the world was not worthy, wandering about in deserts and mountains and in dens and caves of the earth. So what he said here is, in some cases their suffering was temporary. In some cases it was final. And in some cases it was continuing. Now, why is it that this writer started this discussion of faith at the end of chapter 10? What was he wanting to happen in the lives of his readers at the end of chapter 10 when he launched into this discussion? What was the desired goal? All right, he wants them to not lose their confidence. He wants them to endure. He wants them to not to realize your people are the ones who are of faith. They don't draw back to destruction, but they have faith to the saving or to the preserving of their souls. Those are our people. Now, in looking at this, what was he asking? What was he anticipating for them? Was he thinking they were about to be martyred? That's not the impression. It could have happened, but the impression I get is he wants them to hang in there, to endure, to stay with it all the way to the end. It might have been some temporary session, a problem like they had been through, or whatever it was, but it possibly could be, and this is the way I read it, he wanted them to run with patience the race that's set before them. That's where he's headed with this. So in his, it's a genius way of arriving at his point. But which of these is the larger accomplishment of faith? Look at my list here now for a second. Which of these is the larger challenge to faith? The big triumph in some heroic moment, or the torture where you refuse, you could accept it, but you refuse because you're looking to the better life? Or is it the kind of difficulty that you face in going on living? Which is, in his mind now, which is the larger challenge to him? Anybody? Gene? To go on living in this world as it is, for the Lord, loyally and faithfully and obediently, and to endure with the spirit of joy and hope and love that also accompanies what he has been teaching here. That is what he seems to be driving at to me. And he wants us to arrive at the conclusion on our own that yes, this is the story of our people. And we don't have to have gotten to some famous triumph or to some heroic moment or some noticeable group suffering in order for the challenge of faith, the real challenge of faith, which is endurance, to be before us. You think about that. Now, when you look at Hebrews 11 in that way, it has a particular call or particular challenge to our hearts, I think, or to our lives. John put the first one back up there again with the words we started with. All right, now can you see when you look at that what he's been after? Start out with faith and then have patience in it, and make it your desire to please God no matter what. And stay with it with things that are still future or invisible, and have a sense of assurance and conviction that God's commendation will be more than worth whatever it takes. There's a better country. There's a better, the way he says it in verse 35 here, there is a better life that's possible. That's what he keeps telling us here. Now, any comment from any of you about this related to this picture here related to that one before I move to maybe a summary of this? Anybody else? Okay. Maybe the main thing I'm getting at, I think the writer is getting at, is to take us past the theological arguments that people get into about works and faith, and just to say, you can tell what faith is by the stories of the people in this chapter. And you can tell what you can expect of faith by the stories in this chapter that he has summarized here at the end. Look at the other slide, guys, that I put together. Now, this is from that summary that I read a moment ago, and this is we start with those ideas in that first picture at the end of chapter 10, first of chapter 11, and then we come to this is the concept of faith that develops from or emerges from reading Hebrews 11. Faith is that which drives one always forward. And you could go back to the land you came from, but if you're moved along by faith, you don't do that. And God then commends them, Abraham and Sarah, middle of the verses 13 to 16. He's pleased to be called their God because they didn't go back. They couldn't, they wouldn't. That's not how faith is. Faith is venturesome action. It'll, like Noah, it'll build an ark you've never seen. Or like Abraham, it'll go leave home and go to the place you've never laid eyes on yet, and you keep looking for it. Or like Israel, it crosses the sea. Or like Moses, it chooses rather to share ill treatment with the people of God than the pleasures of sin for a moment. Faith is trust and confidence. That you can see it in some of what we've read here tonight. Faith is certainly obedience. And faith is a do word. By faith, some person did something. That's what this chapter says. Faith is endurance or patience, or another word that is used to translate this, perseverance. That's the idea that runs through this. Faith is seeing the invisible in clear focus, not being so bound by this visible world that you love it more than what's invisible. And faith is the ability to forfeit everything, even life, in order to gain the better world to come by God's promise. So, what the writer has done throughout chapter 11, in your opinion, is what? What do you think is the main thing he's done in this chapter? With all these examples and all of these by faith statements, what do you take away from it, Brendan?
He shows it's possible to do it. All these
It is possible. By faith, it is possible. Yeah. All these different ways, all these different circumstances, all these different characters. Anybody else?
39, even though they were commended through their faith, they did not receive what was promised.
Yeah.
But these people have received.
Some of them did, not all of them. And I'm going to try to deal with that a little bit Sunday, but they, all of them eventually do, but the writer is going to say, not without us, because all the promises focuses on the one person who's who? All right, Jesus Christ, that's right. Anything else that you take away from this, John?
To increase our faith.
All right, yes, Lord, increase our faith. That's increase my faith. I think that when I read that, it's a good point, John. Anybody else? Okay. You don't get the impression that it's easy, but you do get the impression it's possible. That's what I take from this. Thank you all so much for being with us. We move along in our reading now. There are about 5 different pictures of Christian hope from this chapter that we should notice. I hope you'll go back and read through it and see what is it they're looking forward to or seeking, and might encourage you to do that. Let's take a moment to pray before we go tonight. Brendan, do you mind can you talk loud enough to lead us in prayer like that? Or you want to borrow this thing? Okay. Let's pray together before we go. Thank you all so much.
Father in heaven, Father, we are so thankful for this time of goodness, you get seeking to come together and study your word. Lord, we pray that you would please help us to be encouraged by this, to have faith, to understand that through faith these things are possible, that we can endure, that we can make it through this life and all through faith. Father, please continue to be with us throughout the rest of this week. Please watch over us and guide us. Lord, your Son. Thank you so much for your Son. I pray this in Jesus' name.
Amen. Everybody have a good rest of the week.